Oh, I'm going to enable, let's see.
Okay, and so it's never more as relevant it is today with all the changes going on due to the pandemic. So really looking forward to rich conversation today. So a little bit more about membership and its privileges. Next slide. We really encourage you, if this is the first time you've joined us, to seek more opportunities to connect with this professional network. It's great networking opportunities. By becoming a member, you save a significant amount on the overall program subscription. And you get great access to a lot of great content and connections with colleagues that we have here at HRSF. So if you have any questions about membership, contact Lori or myself. And we also offer corporate memberships as well, which had additional benefits. So if you join as a corporate member, you can have up to 6 members of your staff automatically registered for each event. More information about all of that on our website. A little bit more about the annual sponsors. We've got, and we really couldn't do this without our annual sponsors. Terrific sponsorship with great local companies here in Northern California, as well as companies expanding globally. And just wanted to give a shout out to those sponsors. And wanted to also welcome new sponsors as of our last meeting. We have Exact Sciences and Career Arc, who just recently joined as sponsors. So if anyone out there is interested in sponsorship, same thing, check it out on the website and we'll follow up with you with more information. Okay, next slide. So I want to say thanks to a new partner, relatively new, LinkedIn. That's a company that I work for. And LinkedIn's actually opened up a group chat, a group forum on linkedin.com, which you can sign up for by invitation. If you're interested in this, contact me. It's a forum around navigating challenging times. It's a free-flowing conversation. There is a ton of information coming to you from various sources to help you navigate, specifically navigating this pandemic. And so a lot of rich information there. And HR Strategy Forum has partnered strongly with LinkedIn on this effort.
So if you're interested, just send Craig a chat. Yeah,
that'd be great. You can also get to me at linkedin.com. So, and this is a shout out for our next programs. Once a month, we have a Let's Lunch, which is a free, completely self-organized virtual lunch meeting from 12 to 1. It allows us to interact in real time on topics of interest. You can register on our website if you're interested in that or find out about future events. It's self-organizing in the sense that the topics that are relevant are ones that we talk about in real time. And the last couple of meetings have just been profoundly insightful for those who have joined and can find out just how other organizations are handling the situations at hand. So, and then we have a half-day program coming up in September. So check that out on the web as well. So these are the upcoming programs. If you want to mark your calendar, all of this is on the website. We obviously are going to be doing our meetings virtually like we are today. We don't know what the future holds, but we're certainly able to come back on site if it's allowed, and you know, getting back together face to face when it's safe to do so. But we've been having real good success in attendance with our virtual meetings, so we encourage everybody to continue coming. So again, just to summarize, lots of benefits for members if you join the HRS Strategy Forum. If you're interested in getting more involved, you can contact one of us on the board, myself or Lori, and most of the folks on the panel today. If you're interested in committee membership, we have lots of opportunities to contribute that way as well. All of this is on our website online at hrstrategyforum.org. Thanks for coming today.
Chris, over to you.
All right, so it's my honor to introduce Glenn as our speaker. And the first thing we'll learn this morning is how to pronounce his name, which is Yo Peace. And it comes in handy, I think, because when somebody's really stressed out, you can now say, yo, peace. And it's going to be something we take with us. But the HR Strategy Forum's theme this year is Agile HR. And we found Glenn by researching thought leaders with practical experience that meshed with that theme. And his background gives a lot of credence to what we're going to learn from him today. He is, the son of Cuban immigrant parents, graduated from UCLA, was a fast rising star at Gallo Wine, had 7 years at Sunkist, where he led the turnaround of Sunkist Beverages and was the youngest executive in their 100-plus year history. He went on to be the vice president of American Seafoods Company, and in 1997 founded Luna Rosa Gourmet Foods with his father. So after 10 years of that and great success, he continues to impact organizations through his consulting company, GLLG. And by the way, along the way, he just had the time to found and direct for 10 years the Hispanic Leadership Academy. So the point is, Glenn's thought leadership comes from his corporate background, and it's very real. We had originally planned for Glenn's session to be in person over a full morning, and this little thing called the pandemic kind of changed the logistics. So therefore, he's going to be going through his material kind of like an express train without stops along the way to get through as much material as possible for us this morning. So please type your questions along the way in the chat box, and there will be a general Q&A session at the end of his material, and then we'll go into breakout sessions. So don't be, he's going to, go through a lot of material quickly, but then we'll have time to sort of absorb it and ask questions and get into the details. One last note is that if you haven't received Glenn's book, please send us your address so that we can get one out to you right away. And I think that's all I have to say as introduction. Let's strap in. I think it's going to be a great ride. Glenn, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. And thanks for reminding me of when I walked into classrooms at UCLA that I always would tell everybody, hey, yo, peace. Works every time. What I find interesting is how many people forget that after I've said it. And
Really?
that tells you a lot about how much people are really paying attention to understand who you are as an individual. But I really appreciate the time that we've spent preparing for what I hope is an inspiring, thought-provoking, and really meaningful session today. And for all of those who are in attendance, thanks for being here. I certainly hope that you and your families are safe and well. You know, what makes a crisis like this so different is that it's personal. It's very personal. No one is exempt from a crisis like this. No one. And we're all experiencing the ramifications, many of which we would have never expected in our lives and that are completely out of our control. But what do we do today? What do we do to prepare ourselves now for what awaits us in the next normal and in the series of normals that follow? So let's now begin this journey of learning and preparedness together as I welcome you to leadership in the age of personalization. You know, crisis has a way of revealing or course correcting and recalibrating what leadership really means. You know, we're witnessing the collapse of the standardization model, the model of leadership based on command and control, hierarchy and silos, the one that defined the measures of success for people, then rewarded only those who met those measures. It was about creating barriers, defining the narrative, and putting people in boxes and protecting the establishment. You know, standardization, it creates efficiency, but that was a fine goal in a world where things were predictable. But efficiency is not resilient. And resilience requires adaptability, and adaptability requires the freedom for people to be their most individual selves. You know, we're living this right now in a very literal sense. most of us have been ordered to stay at home. Let's examine the following two contrasting images. First, a group of people all being standardized into efficiently moving in one direction and then hunkering down. They can continue to get the work done because they're all on the same schedule. It's efficient. And it's efficient to keep them sheltered and fed because they're all doing the same thing in the same place, following the same rules. And because of that, they're vulnerable to one small virus. Now, the second is the same group of 1,000 people dispersed into their own individual homes across a wide geographic area. They can tap their own resources, tend to their own families, create their own schedules, and tackle their assignments at their own pace. You see, in this scenario, things are quite chaotic because no one is on the same schedule. No one's doing the same thing at the same time. No one is in the same place. And because of that, they are resilient. You see, this is the age of personalization coming into focus. But beyond the literal, this shows us that personalization actually might appear chaotic, and we tend to mistakenly think of chaotic as all bad, while standardization might appear to be efficient, and we tend to mistakenly think of efficient as all good. You see, standardization can't scale. It just can't scale in its current form much longer. Tomorrow will not bring more efficiency, but rather more healthy chaos. The organizations that survive it will be the ones who can navigate this chaos with an approach that I call constructive interruption, a process of proactively interrupting the standards and routines that actually stifle our ability to adapt. Now, let's break this down, dig deeper, and better understand the layers and strategic implications around what it means to lead in the age of personalization. See, it's becoming less about the business defining the individual and much more about the individual defining the business. In other words, the age of standardization is giving way to the age of personalization. So what happens when the business defines the individual? Well, individuals were measured on how well they execute based on how the organization wants them to think, really limiting their abilities to best serve the unique needs of the business. You see, in this type of an environment, the individual is being told what to do inside the box they're given. Individuals play not to lose, and this is where complacency ensues. Now, what happens when the individual defines the business? Well, individuals now have the freedom to be much more inclusive. They are rewarded for sharing their wisdom for the betterment of the business. They embrace diversity of thought and appreciate differences in order to see and seize previously unseen opportunities. You see, individuals are now courageous and they play to win. And this is where innovation ensues. So the reality is that the balance of power has shifted and companies haven't been prepared enough to know what to do about it. See, they're not ready for the necessary evolution. They're still trying to standardize everyone and everything. Now, I get it. It's hard to let go of old, comfortable, usual ways of doing things, isn't it? I mean, knowing something is right isn't enough to start doing it. And knowing something is wrong isn't enough to stop doing it. See, before COVID-19, organizations and their leaders were already in crises. Billions of dollars were being spent on transformation efforts to better serve a more informed and knowledgeable individual, both in the workplace and marketplace. Disruption was in full swing. Now, you can think of each transformation as its own mini crises. Now, imagine thousands of mini crises happening all at once, each in different phases and stages. People in nearly every organization were being asked to change the way They were doing things, learn new concepts, operationalize new standards, then accept and reach elevated levels of performance. Most of those transformation efforts meet similar challenges, many of which you've experienced yourself. Resistance to embrace something new, frustration and exhaustion with implementation, a lack of agility to keep up, and certainly not enough empathy along the way for those being asked to change. You see, when you compound this across thousands of mini crises, you actually begin to witness the totality of the broader challenge. Transformation without transparency just doesn't work. You see, we have created a maze that we can't escape. Why? Because corporate strategies were not designed to serve the mass variances in people. So if the first step in solving a problem is defining it, we must see how we're actually holding on to standardization, why it doesn't work, and then learn to let go of those parts that fail us in the age of personalization. Because personalization, it spooks standardization. And when threatened, standardization fights back hard. Yet businesses have done this for years to employees when it comes to what I call the cultural demographic shift, otherwise known as the CDS. You see, the CDS is my term for what happens when large cultural segments of the population reach numbers sufficient enough to have a significant effect on what we do and how we act. Let me repeat that. When large cultural segments of the population reach numbers sufficient enough to have a significant effect on what we do and how we act. You see, today the CDS is in full force, and this force will be even truer in the workforce as older workers retire and the next and latest generations, millennials and Gen Z, replace them. You see, these generations are the most ethnically and racially diverse generations ever. And despite the fact that they're always wearing earbuds and their eyes are on their phones, most studies show that they are more driven to earn and more eager to make their mark than the generations before them. And by the way, they want to do this as individuals inclusive of all people. These generations are not inclined to assimilate. In fact, these future leaders have already started to disrupt the way the workforce looks, but also the way it thinks, with an entirely different view on commitment. See, money may be important, but a paycheck is not enough to stay committed. For them, it's actually about two questions. But they're two questions that matter to everyone. Do you see me? Do you know me? Do you see me? Do you know me? More and more, we want to know who we are. We want to know where we belong. We want to have purpose and contribute to something. See, we want to have more influence and opportunity and be respected for what we stand for. See, that's the age of personalization. And there are 5 necessary shifts to lead in this new era. You see, in the age of personalization, we must actually solve for inclusion, because when we're stuck in standardization, we solve for diversity, but not inclusion, and we see others as other. In the age of personalization, we must stop promoting tribalism and start seeing each other as human. See, organizational cultures won't change unless we begin to interrupt the limitations of tribal thinking. In the age of personalization, we must shift the organization's focus from brand identity to individual identities by accounting for the realities and values of individuals to create a greater sense of alignment. See, today, individuals are not allowing brands to define them anymore. They want to define them. In the age of personalization, we must invigorate a shared mission by elevating individual contribution. See, the company mission can't be more valued than our contribution to it. In the age of personalization, we must free people from the tyranny of results and activate methods for leading in a way that honors today's age of personalization. Here's a question for you. I mean, when you think of results, do you think about growth, or do you actually think about just delivering on what you're being told to do? Before we explore each of these shifts in greater detail, let me be clear. We just can't ditch standards. They're important. However, they just need to evolve from the past, and we need to find the right balance between standardization and personalization. I mean, think about a pendulum for a moment. It's always swinging from one extreme to another before ultimately settling in the middle. Now, right now, and clearly post-COVID, we were in the stage of a swing that hadn't settled yet, which means we were constantly fighting the back and forth from the extreme of standardization to the opposite extreme of personalization. Now, given the time that we have today, I'll give you a briefing of what each of the 5 shifts mean. A case study example based on clients, interviews, and our one-on-one meetings I've had with C-suite executives, and then share some recommended first steps to operationalize the shifts. Shift number 1, from diversity to inclusion. You see, diversity does not automatically lead to inclusion. Inclusion is a system for making sure the organization is welcoming at every level to every individual. Individuality is actually a concerted effort to know and account for the realities and the values of individual employees and customers. See, leaders love to tout their commitment to diversity, even as they continue to hire and promote people who demonstrate the thoughts that have already been deemed worthy. In other words, they say they want diversity of thought, and then they hire for conformity of thought. See, diversity is about silos, feeling separate and unwelcomed, while inclusion is about belonging, feeling seen, known, and welcomed. How about if I told you, in today's age of personalization, working in a safe environment where no one is judged is more important than employee engagement? It's more important than employee engagement. Why? Because judgment, or lack thereof, is at the core of what defines the employee experience. Now, let's have a look at our first case study. It will demonstrate how Intel is practicing shift number 1. So what's Intel solving for? How to reclaim their organization's culture amid marketplace uncertainty. Now, this is what their CHRO shared. We must provide psychological safety. Work can be a place to throw out a crazy idea and know that I won't be judged for that idea, where there is no humiliation. So much is lost when we don't have that assurance that we can move forward fearlessly and boldly to come up with a better solution and better idea. How about ADT? What are they solving for? Well, they're a legacy company, 105-year-old brand, and they ask their customers and employees one question: what do you want to protect? Now, this is what their chief marketing officer concluded. Consumers and employees today are one and the same. They both want to protect things. They are equally relevant stakeholders. Well, what does this mean? We must see them equally as contributors to the brand, not just workers and buyers of the brand. Let's now move to shift number 2, from tribal to human. You see, tribal thinking and silos in business Well, they actually put people into boxes that they check, much like diversity, and divide departments, work, people, identities, and our stories from each other. This makes the people in the silos less cross-functional, collaborative, and communicative with each other, less human toward each other, just as it does in the highly polarized and contentious world that we live in today. So what's the point of bringing diversity into your organization if you don't let people share what makes them distinct? See, organizational cultures, again, won't change unless we interrupt the limitations of tribal thinking. A human approach to leadership shakes us from our silos and makes us want to seek and have relationships based on genuine interactions that let us see and know our customers and employees. Think of it this way. Tribal is about assimilation, and human is authenticity. And every day we witness individuals battling the gulf between assimilation and authenticity. Let's have a look at what Farmers is doing. Before we get there, I'm actually going to share what Chico's is doing with this shift from tribal to human. So what are they solving for? Allow your people to own the strategy. Simplify, don't complicate. What does this mean? Well, here's what their chief strategy officer shared. You look at other companies and think, well, they have a corporate strategy, so we probably need a corporate strategy group too. Assimilation. See, the people who create the strategy should implement the strategy. They believe in it. They are the authors. They should own it. We must create conditions for people, not PowerPoint decks, to drive the buy-in process. So here's some recommendations to operationalize shifts 1 and 2, from diversity to inclusion and from tribal to human. See, it's about getting to know yourself. It's about getting to know each other. And it's about seeing beyond experience and welcoming diversity of thought. It's about capacities elevated, not just one's awareness, but when awareness actually elevates one's capacity to perform. Let's now move to shift number 3, from brand identity to individual identities. You see, finding ways to let individual identities impact the brand can be powerful. You see, today, people want to identify with the brand whose products and services give their business or life meaning and significance. Employees and customers want to align with brands that are capable of leading and serving them based on the person's own values, needs, and desires. This shifts the balance of power, and I'm going to say this slowly, from brands and businesses to individuals to the standardization of me. The balance of power shifts from brands and businesses to individuals to the standardization of me. Organizations that make employees and consumers feel included and understood on an individual level will have a huge advantage over those that don't. Think of it this way. Think of brand identity as shaping what people need and want to match what you offer, while individual identities is about shaping what you offer to match what people need and want. Let's take a look at how Farmers Insurance is practicing the shift from brand identity to individual identity. So what are they solving for? Again, another legacy brand entrenched in outdated standards that serve generations of the past, but not the present. Now, their chief transformation officer shared the development of a new operating unit called Toggle. See, Toggle is a new platform designed to allow the unique needs of millennials and Gen Z to influence farmers' business model of the future. Now, Toggle is about helping farmers break free from old school standards by slowly pilot testing new learnings and operating standards that honor personalization without overly disrupting. Shift number 4, from mission to contribution. You see, every organization has a mission, a value, and employees will buy in on the surface of those values and mission statements because there's really no freedom not to. Employees may join the organization because they share in the mission, or they might just need a job. But why should that matter if what they really want is to contribute? I mean, what's most meaningful to people is to know that they have a chance to contribute their unique skills and strengths no matter the mission. So how can we enable individuals to personalize the way they serve the organization's mission and values? That's the big question. You see, mission is about control, and contribution is about influence. So how is this playing out at CVS today? Well, CVS is solving for what? Well, a supply chain department that's wanting to operate like a profit center rather than a cost center. See, they want to think like a profit center so that they can actually broaden their sphere of influence throughout the enterprise. So what have they done? They've personalized how the entire supply chain works. A supply chain that flows over $51 billion of goods. And how it supports the transformation of CVS's shift from being a retailer to a healthcare company and their new mission. We are healthcare innovators. So you could imagine how this has played out during this COVID crisis. What's been their focus? How did they do this? Well, they focused on connecting each and every one's individual contribution, or what is known as what they solve for, what each individual solves for, to CVS's leadership competencies and supply chain goals. Again, it's connecting one's individual contribution to CVS's competencies and supply chain goals. Now, to better understand this, let's explore what the future of work looks like. See, in the traditional workplace, they practice what? Substitutional thinking. Why? Because it was hyper-siloed, limiting an environment that actually supports inclusion and one's individual contribution. Now, in the workplace of the future, it eliminates silos and creates conditions for interconnectedness and interdependence. And you see that on the left side. But on the right side, notice this. Notice that employees are defined by their leadership identity that is based on what they solve for. In other words, how they can best contribute to the specific needs of the business. Now, here are the 4 questions that define what you solve for. 1, what's your enduring idea? What's unique about the way you think? 2, what's your primary differentiator? What actually gives you distinction as a leader and employee? 3, what's your primary experience? What do others expect from your presence? And 4, what do you solve for? In other words, what types of solutions do you consistently deliver? You see, what you solve for is a combination of interest, what you stand for, your capacity, capabilities, skills, values, and experiences. In simple terms, it's what you enjoy and consistently think about in a big way. Think about what you solve for right now. What is it that you enjoy and consistently think about in a big way? Write it down if you have a moment. What comes to mind? Now, here's an example of Brad's value proposition. In other words, what he solves for as a leader. His enduring idea is all around fierce simplicity, because his primary differentiator is that he craves common sense, because his primary experience is about getting to the point. You see, what Brad solves for is clarity. And it's because of this, his leadership identity is the focus igniter, simply accelerating the end game. Now notice, with these 4 simple questions, he can now share a story about who he is as an individual so that people can see him and know him better, so that they know how to best integrate him as it relates to how the business can grow and can meet the needs of the organization. But let's multiply Brad by 6 people. And what do you get? You get a team that can solve for what? If you look at the blue boxes, what these individuals solve for, what can these people solve for together? They can solve for just about anything. What's the point? When you know what you solve for, it now takes you to an entirely new dimension of individual contribution, because it's a lot more than what your job title and job descriptions represent. And this is why our individual capacities oftentimes remain dormant. Why our individual capacities oftentimes remain dormant. So here are some recommendations to operationalize shifts number 3 and 4, from brand identity to individual identities and from mission to contribution. It's about creating systems for inviting input and acting on it. It's about learning what you solve for and knowing what others solve for. It's about connecting solves with challenges. But it's about moving from elevating to activating capacities. It's about capacities activated. Now let's move to our final shift, from results to methods. Now, unless you evolve your old standards, you'll never be distinct. And when you let people break free from the standards of the past and attack challenges in their own way, you open up new possibilities. You see, results is not a negative word. We should expect people to deliver results. But too often, our focus on results or on prescribed methods actually keeps us from seeking bigger opportunities to grow in the future. See, prioritizing results is about being boxed in, having a predetermined definition of success that limits one's capacity and capabilities. While prioritizing methods is allowing people the freedom to experiment and to fulfill their capacity and capabilities. If you think about it, this is what we're allowing people to do right now in these more virtual environments. So how's Bank of America practicing shift number 5, from results to methods? Well, first of all, what are they solving for? They're trying to remove the artificial boundaries that they have placed in front of people in the past for both employees and clients. As our Chief Operating Officer shared, our financial advisors must go beyond addressing the traditional customer concerns. We're using AI to anticipate personalized needs and be proactive in providing more service options. See, that's one big thing about personalization. Standardization limits options while personalization provides more options. And so what have they done? Well, they've been able to tear down measures of success that don't apply anymore. We now measure satisfaction to expand opportunities rather than measure sales that oftentimes places limits on relationships. Now, here are some recommendations to operationalize shift number 5, from results to methods. It's about letting people experiment, creating a culture that rewards new methods. It's about energizing people to think differently and share their ideas. It's about moving from capacities elevated and activated to now capacities realized. It's about capacities realized. So this takes us back to the question that we started with. How do you find the right balance? And how do you find the right balance across these 5 necessary shifts to lead in the age of personalization? As an individual, as a department, or as an enterprise? And as I reveal these, I want you to think about yourself and your own organization, because it's really about discovering where you are stuck in standardization, where you are stuck in standardization. It's about discovering where your organization is stuck in standardization. And it's, at the end of the day, finding ways to standardize personalization. It's about finding ways to standardize personalization. It's about moving from capacities elevated, activated, and realized to now capacities exceeded. See, we must stop falling into the standardization traps that slow progress down. But how do we do this? Well, we must stop ruling by standardization and start leading with personalization. See, we must strengthen cultures by allowing one's individual capacities to be elevated, activated, realized, and exceeded. If you don't create the right conditions that allows the individual to navigate healthy chaos through their own lens, it will be impossible to solidify an employee experience platform to create future legacies. And see, this is why HR executives today, they must play a more integrated role with corporate strategy. It's about aligning individual capacities with organizational needs. And when you do that, that's where future legacies are born. See, it's about taking the time to understand the transformational impact of leadership in the age of personalization across the entire enterprise. Across the entire enterprise. You see, these are the dimensions of impact that you have as an HR executive that must reverberate throughout the organization. Let me be really blunt. In the age of personalization, your value as an HR executive, it multiplies. It multiplies because now you're actually moving out of your own silo to have broader enterprise influence that's all about growth. Growth in the business, growth in the individual. But here's the big question. What is your readiness? What is your readiness? And what is the readiness of each individual in your organization, regardless of hierarchy or rank? You know, in February, I had the pleasure of conducting a 30-day immersive coaching program with the CEO of one of the largest automotive brands in North America. A CEO who was so stuck in standardization, stuck deep, which is the lowest level of readiness, but yet was open-minded enough to get out of it, because the automotive industry has historically been so slow to change as the marketplace passed them by. See, when we first started our one-on-one time together, he was concerned that some of his C-suite colleagues might find the concept of leading in the age of personalization as somewhat abstract. But after the 30-day immersion, he wrote me an email that included the following. He said, leadership in the age of personalization is not about just respecting one's personal attributes and unique needs. It's about your overall approach to the business, its strategies, and how it operates in a more interconnected and interdependent manner that utilizes the capacities and capabilities of your people across the entire organization. It actually forces you to flatten the organizational chart to create a culture where everyone contributes to growth. The 5 shifts actually pressure test your values, missions, and leadership competencies of the organization. The 5 shifts keep you honest. And then this is the point that really was an awakening. He said, I now realize that I have spent the last 30 years in an industry that is indelibly steeped in the principles of old school, uncompromising standardization discipline. Perhaps this reminds you of a company that you're working for or have worked for in the past. Now, as we close, the limits of standardization should remind us all that without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution. You see, standardization is the act of practicing substitutional thinking, while personalization is the act of practicing evolutionary thinking. Today, the moment calls for leaders, companies, and countries the world over to reinvent themselves. But this is only possible when we build the right systems that focus on inclusion and the power of individuality. Let me put it a little bit differently. It's about the ability to mobilize dignity at scale. Because in the end, it's about respecting our humanity as individuals for the betterment of a healthier whole. Thank you very much. Now, before we continue, I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen, process, absorb. I hope that you almost felt yourself inside the story. But just in case you're still processing it and trying to get your hands around all this, on behalf of my organization, GLLG, we'd like to offer all attendees with 30 days of complimentary Leadership in the Age of Personalization online training. And this link here is a link that Lori and the team from HR Strategy Forum will send to all of you. What does it encompass? 7 courses, 21 chapters, 2 hours and 50 minutes. It'll take you on a learning journey from standardization to personalization and how we go from extremes to balance and how we find that right balance. And within this curriculum, it also features exclusive footage from our Leadership in the Age of Personalization Summit that took place last October. It also includes an interactive and personalized approach to the training. In other words, it's designed based upon where you're at in the journey. It also provides situational analyses or thought experiments. And then finally, at the end of each chapter, you'll have a chance to take a 3-question quiz to make sure you're right on track. So with that, Lori, should we move into the Q&A?
Yes. So let's do about 5-10 minutes Q&A. And what I would suggest here is just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question. And I know I did see that Mike had a question, Mike Kent, and turn on your videos as well. Any questions out there? You can also do some comments.
Well, this is Chris. I had put a question into the chat box. I totally get that you want to bring out the individual contributions of everyone, but I'm still a little confused about how do you form a collective identity and honor individualization? And if you're really just opening it up for individuals to contribute and all that sort of thing, do you foster, or does it encourage people to kind of get competitive with each other in a negative way? So there's a collective good versus individual good. How do you balance it is my question.
You know why we've grown so complacent, Chris? Because we become institutions that endorse and almost reward complacency, which is an offshoot of standardization. And in the end, look, there's nothing wrong with a little healthy tension, but we've practiced so much tribalism, we haven't begun to even know what the benefits are of being human in creating environments that bring tension. I mean, at the end of the day, individuality is about how do we bring the best from the collective whole. I mean, let me be very blunt. I believe that there are leaders today, Chris, that shouldn't even be leaders. The marketplace passed them by years ago. But oftentimes, we just keep them around because they're almost the adopters of standardization. And so they almost serve as those that monitor activity rather than trying to find ways to evolve the business. Now, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of those people. Those people have a lot of wisdom that can serve in an advisory capacity. But if you look at one's job description, if you look at people throughout an entire organization, which I've done so many times in the past 14 years, there's massive talent gaps, massive confusions of who does what. And in the end, what do people end up doing? What they're told, because they don't want to get caught in the web of the political race within an organization, whether it's large or small. So I just share that individuality is entailed to create competition, but you know what's really entailed for? It's entailed to create respect. I mean, we're organizations that have valued recognition more than respect. And there are people that may get rewarded for doing good, but they're not rewarded enough for the respect that they've earned, and how that respect can turn into opportunities, not just for that individual, but helping people get discovered. I mean, I believe that organizations have, in many respects, made it impossible for people to get discovered. Why do you think during this COVID-19 crisis, we're cheering on the frontliners, the first responders? Why? Because, see, in business, the ones that are really the value transformation efforts are the people that touch the business just as much as they lead it.
I completely agree.
I've often believed that why do we need all these consultants to spend millions of dollars on telling leaders, trust me, I've been hired, and I often wondered, well, your people knew what had to be done, but why not? Because those people don't feel safe that they can go beyond what they're being told to do to be disruptive.
Right.
Well, anyway, sorry for the long answer, but you asked a very good question.
Thank you.
You bet.
So Glenn, Mike also had a question. What happens when the individuals all define the business differently?
Guess what? Your organization evolves. Because first of all, if they're defining, let's go back. Is it about defining if they all define the business differently? Was that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So shame on leadership. Let me explain. The goal here, let me take it back to HR for a moment, right? That's our audience. Oftentimes we ask our people to follow certain leadership competencies, certain behaviors. And by the way, there are companies, I'll give one example, that has 10 leadership competencies and 57 related behaviors. And by the way, everyone is measured on how well they do all that. Personally, I've learned that that's impossible. Unless you shadow someone, there's no way you're going to be able to measure that. So what do people do? And I'll give you a real example. In fact, I remember this. There was an individual that said, I followed all the competencies. I practiced the behaviors. I actually mimicked the way I did my business based upon the leaders in our organization that are respected the most. And I still wasn't considered for the vice president's job. You see my point? The whole point, Mike, is that we want people to not disrespect how organizations want them to behave. We want people to operate in a way that represents how they see the world that they're responsible for and act on that through their own lens in a way that honors the way the organization wants them to think. So it goes back to finding that balance between standardization and personalization. And what we've learned is that when you do this, you ultimately create environments of, as I mentioned earlier, of healthy chaos. And where I'm getting at, it goes back to when you have people, because you actually, this is what that question really asked is, when you have people that solve for different things that influences the business in different ways, that's when the organization evolves.
Great. Jennifer, is your hand raised for a question? No, okay, all right. Any other questions before we're going to take a break and then we're going to go into breakouts?
This is Edie. Just to kind of further expand on that, because I had a little bit of a problem with that. Is it more that your employees should live and express the company brand in their own way? That it's not about reinterpreting it for yourself, because if we're not living the company brand, you actually diminish what that brand is, you know. So is it more about kind of living it through your own way and not fighting against it or reinterpreting it in some fashion?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. But having said that, I mean, how often do we find brands where their value proposition means one thing, and then as it evolves, it means something else? And oftentimes, I mean, I'll give you an example. Let's say that a brand that you have an individual that's worked for the organization for 25 years. Oftentimes, they still believe what the brand is what it was 25 years ago. While people who have been recently hired into an organization, they're living the brand through their own lens based upon what the brand is now. And the question becomes, how do we find, again, that balance so that we don't find misinterpretations that then start weakening the culture and the identity of the organization?
Did that answer your question, Edie? Okay, Shreya has her hand up. Oh, she lowered her hand. Oh.
Karen.
Oh, Karen, okay.
Yeah, I do have a question, so let Karen go first.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So, Glenn, I love the concepts. They're fascinating, and I can see how empowering they could be. Still wrapping my head around the operationalizing it. And in my mind, I can't help but draw connections between this move to more personalization in the workplace with what we're experiencing with the whole shelter in place, which is really, and homeschooling, which is showing the divide kind of between the people that have the jobs and the luxury and the technology to shelter in place, work from home, homeschool their kids well, and the people that it's either you go out into the dreamy world or you don't have a job. So if I think about how we would then operationalize more dignity and personalization in any kind of organization, have you had experience implementing this kind of thing with more traditionally blue-collar jobs, and how do you see the implementation to be different and what's realistic?
Well, it's interesting with blue-collar organizations. These are environments where people, they want an identity, and oftentimes don't feel like they have one. And it's actually much easier because with blue collar jobs, those are jobs where people are getting their hands dirty, not figuratively or literally, some, others not. But this actually, the operationalization is, to operationalize, it's much easier than, let's call it, a traditional a corporate environment, because in the corporate environment, there's certain stigmas about how you can behave and what's acceptable. While in the blue collar jobs, there's much more room and freedom, recognizing the type of work that they do. So I guess in simple terms, it's the same process of operationalizing as I've identified. It's just that there's more openness to it.
Fascinating. Thank you.
So let's, we've got questions built in at the end. So Shreya, if you're okay, can you hold your question because we've got 15 minutes built in at the end. So what we're going to do, let's take a 5-minute break. And what I would, normally when we meet in person, this is our networking time. So I would say in this case, you've got 5 minutes to either do a bio break or you can network here with each other online. And we do have a connecting question. And that would be, what's most disruptive for you or your organization about personalization? So you can communicate with each other in chat and or connect with folks. But let's come back at 9:15 and then we'll go into breakout sessions. But so far, very, very intriguing, Glenn.
Well, thank you. And you know, I'll just share this, that I know I mean, think about what this is all doing. It's rewiring us to reclaim our identity. And I've often said that the chronic disease that corporate America has created is an identity crisis. And I think this is why, I mean, when you talk, at least the executives that I've spoken to during COVID, that they sense that that their people feel more comfortable having that freedom of working from home. And that freedom, it's almost, and as I've talked to people, not just on the front lines, but, you know, managers and directors, it's almost the freedom of not feeling that they have to be a certain way when they're at work. But it's what makes all this very interesting, and is that you're giving an individual the opportunity to discover themselves. And I can't tell you how many people, and this is thousands, that they felt that they had to be a certain way to get promoted, to be accepted, when they realized that all that was doing was limiting their growth and that of their department and their organization. I mean, you know, here's something I'd encourage everyone, is because, you know, unpacking this, you don't have to use the terms to practice the things that we've discussed, because everyone is unknowingly doing some of these things every day. They just don't know it. And it's a problem when they actually don't know what they're solving for, because then it becomes inconsistent in its in their ability to operationalize. But I'd encourage everyone to go to ageofpersonalization.com, ageofpersonalization.com, because what our talented team of millennials and Gen Zs have taken the videos from our summit last year, and they've literally unpacked just how people are practicing the things that we've talked about, where they're at on the journey, what's worked and what hasn't. And I can tell you one thing, especially given this COVID-19 crisis, Lori, is it the one industry that you would think is practicing personalization, healthcare, is the one that is not practicing it well at all. And you keep in mind that an industry like healthcare, it's an industry that's all about serving patients. It's very mission driven, but they have been stuck in protocols that were designed over 100 years ago. And so this is where, when you think about leadership and when you think about the role of HR, I mean, an HR leader in healthcare is completely different than an HR leader in, let's call it, a traditional Fortune 500 company. Why? Because HR in healthcare is all about compliance, regulations, which I get, it's important. but it doesn't put enough emphasis on leadership or helping individuals kind of find their path at a time where, again, we're all in the business of healthcare. Consumers and patients now are one of the same. The consumer, we as patients / consumers, we have the choice of knowing where we get our healthcare. The whole industry model has changed. So I share this because season 3 of our documentary actually comes out next week, and you can hear how the healthcare business is really challenged by it, when this is an industry that is very much trying to move to personalization. They're really stuck in standardization.
Yeah. Okay. So break is up. I think hopefully everyone is back. Glenn, if you would just flip your slide to the break. Okay. I need to, no. Yes. Okay, great. So these are the breakout questions. So we're going to put you into 5 different breakout groups. You'll have 15 minutes, and each group will be addressing one of the questions. And your facilitators, and those are the people with the F's in front of their names, will have the questions, but I also put them into chat, and I'll put them into chat again. But we want you to, with your question as a group, to answer it and to rank the options that you have from most effective to least effective. Select a spokesperson who will share the ranking. You'll have about 2 minutes in the report outs to go ahead and somebody is set a timer. I think that is my producer husband. That's a not so subtle way of giving me feedback here. All right, so select a spokesperson, and that person should not be the facilitator. So James is going to put you into breakout groups. Anything else, James? And you'll have 15 minutes. So you'll get a little pop-up to join, and then you'll have a 1-minute warning to come back.
So before we go there, Lori,
Okay, so yes, we're going to get a screenshot of all the participants.
Okay, I got it for everybody that's up.
Okay, then we'll put you into breakout groups.
Okay.
Magic is about to happen. Mike, did you get a group?
he's actually gone. I think
Andrea, did you get invited to a group? Oh, you're muted.
I can't do anything for him.
Nope.
She's not invited to a group for some reason.
Oh, because she came back. Okay,
I'm gonna,
I'll take care of that. Invite her to group 2.
and you probably want to stop recording.
Option, okay, you guys don't have questions. There was an option around.
I can share the questions if you'd like me to.
Well, no, that's okay.
Okay.
As you please. There was an option around look for somebody. Look for someone who seems like a good fit and agrees with your vision for the role, so you can hit the ground running. We very quickly all agreed that that was the worst approach to take. Look for somebody who has the right experience, but also open to somebody without the experience if they have the right education or recommendation from somebody you know personally. While that sounded like a good idea, we were really afraid that was a hiring just like me, like somebody I know, or somebody who has the right education. That just sounded suspiciously like not hiring for, not getting diversity of thought. And so then there were two other options which we thought were oddly specific. One was being open to somebody who pushes back on your metrics, and the other was somebody who questions your vision for the role, not for the project, but for the role, in case there's a better idea. And we ultimately concluded that it's some sort of combination of those two. What it really is about somebody who pushes back and questions the approach that's being taken, or what's going on, because kind of open to the ideas of other people is ultimately what you want on the team.
That was excellent, Edie. Thank you. So Edie, I have a question for you. First of
Yes,
all, I like how you said it's a combination. The only reason that question 3, I would have ranked it higher, is because it's about the vision versus the metric. It has more of the bigger picture implications.
Yes, we agree with that.
So why is it that people get so hung up on number 2? Looking for someone who has the right experience, but also open to someone with the experience if they have the right education, or a recommendation for someone that they know personally.
I think being open to somebody who doesn't fit the role is great, and that's absolutely perfect. But when you start to get to the right education, or somebody who is a recommendation from somebody else, those are tricky paths to walk down, because they could be, hire somebody in my image, hire somebody who has the right, who is the same, we all came from Harvard. So, if he's a Harvard boy, then he's going to be good on your team. Or, I really like this guy who's just like me, put him on your team.
Thank you,
So
Edie.
that was my concern.
No, and rightfully so. But the reason I bring this up, younger.
There are certain benefits. I agree with Carolyn that it could be that you're open to somebody without the right experience. If it had just ended there, we would have gone, bang, that's it.
See, let me give you an example of something I recently experienced. An organization had hired an individual, and the CHRO, and I'm sure that someone has experienced this, they were told by 2 of the most influential people in the organization, and this was for a C-suite position, to hire the individual. And the executive felt almost obligated to do it because it was the right political decision. So what's happened there? That CHRO fell so deep in standardization, and what she didn't realize is that other colleagues who weren't as high on the totem pole and didn't have as much influence thought it was a bad hire. And so, look, I know this may sound prehistoric, but these things still happen. And what we find is that we're already opening up, we're already creating tribalism in the organization. In other words, that individual who was hired for failure, not success, because now they're having to live up to the expectations of one group of individuals and not for what's actually required in the position. I mean, I once had, I don't know if you've ever heard of, well, we all know about Carnival Cruise Lines. Arnold Donald is the president, and he and I actually had a very interesting conversation about this particular topic. And he said to me, Glenn, if I'm looking for a marketing person, I don't hire for someone who has 10, 20 years of marketing. You know why? Because what they do is they bring that experience of 10, 20 years ago that is completely irrelevant in today's marketplace. What he hires for is capacity, which goes back to what we discussed. And so I just share this because I believe that in the future, especially as we're moving rapidly towards personalization, it's going to be less about, and I know this is a bold statement, and I, again, say this very respectfully. I think that those that had let's put it this way, I think resumes have grown outdated. It doesn't really matter what metric you accomplished 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or in many respects, even 5 years ago, because what is required from a function today has already been reinvented the world over. And what's really interesting about that, guess who reinvented it? Wasn't the organization, it was the industry that you're in. Oh my God, they do it that way, so we should do it that way. And we have this way of commoditizing roles.
All right, we need to move
really
to group.
thinking
We need
what
to
we
move to
need.
group
Sorry.
2.
Sorry, go.
Well, it's okay. We can cut into the Q&A a little bit, but let's move to group 2. Okay, great.
Thank you, Edie.
Okay, so I was in group 2 and volunteered as a speaker. And it was interesting. So we had the situation of being a team of 5 where one of the group is a little bit not fitting in, is not a cohesive group feeling. 4 of them get along really well, and the 5th one is not as easy to blend. So we had these 4 options, and just spontaneously we did not land on 1 and 3. We were split first on the number 2 to accept the dynamic as it is, to kind of obtain the diversity and just leave the group as is, or to encourage the number 4, to encourage the more cohesive group to be more intentional about including the 5th person. But then our discussion went on to feeling that maybe there should be a 5th option, which is like really to try to work with the situation, to have the leader of the group maybe be a little bit more intentional in taking that 5th person who is not as integrated aside and have a more one-on-one conversation and listen to the reasoning and the feelings and hear them out, and also the 4s maybe also on one-on-one, and see how you can work with the group dynamic and how you can include it, but definitely not change the group. Or we all agree that the group should stay together, but you have to work on everybody being included.
Andrea, this is great. This is perfect. You're right. So why don't we do that enough? Why is it just easier to go to number 3? Why is it easier to go to question number 1? Why don't we do 2 enough? Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the standard way of sticking to what works and not challenge yourself, not challenge the individual, and not challenge the behaviors of the organization, I guess.
Exactly. It takes too much time. And when you've got 400 emails that's in your inbox, the last thing you want to do is deal with something like this. So what happens is we continue to fall into standardization traps that makes us feel that we're progressing, but it's slowing our ability to evolve down. It kind of goes back to Mike's question. What happens when you have individuals that define the business differently? Oftentimes people feel threatened by those that do, and they'll try to make sure that maybe they'll just give the excuse that it was a bad hire, when it actually could be the individual that can be the one to propel a sense of an environment that's more human, because not everybody has to agree. Yeah. And question number 2, again, goes back to it's okay to have an environment where there's tension, but it also goes back to that proposed 5th option. Take the time to know what people are really thinking and feeling. And for some reason, we think that that's a sign of vulnerability on our part to do that, and thus we don't value that time that would be much more valued and would earn that leader much more respect for doing it. Thank you for that, Andrea. Excellent job by the group.
Thank you.
All right, we ready to move to group number 3? Who's presenting for number 3?
That would be me, Karen.
Karen.
So here's our situation. Our brand is known for excellent client service. Over the years, the team has consistently over-delivered, and in fact, this has now led to exhaustion for one team member who refuses to work any additional weekends, no matter the deadline. So that resonated a lot. I think it's pretty common. And what I'm hearing from my friends that are still working, which I happily am not, but is that it's only gotten worse. Now that people are working from home, it's like, oh, well, now that you're not commuting, let's have a meeting at 2 a.m. So similar to what Andrea's team said, we didn't love any of the sentences exactly, but what we did say is number 4, consult with all the team members and find out, well, how's it working for them? What do they need? Is this, a common problem? I guess would be, it probably is, but it's going to manifest differently. And what do you need to do as a leader? So that was our far and away number 1 thing. Pragmatically, I know people are part of a system, and some managers feel more empowered and able than others to not only ask the question, but deal with what the answers are. So there's some support that they need from their management and from HR to be able to do things differently. Then we said, okay, the next thing we would do to kind of augment this would be number 2. So consider that maybe you need more staff, although that's not always the answer. Or maybe you're making unrealistic promises and need to find a way to get realistic again in the name of long-term customer service so that you have fresh, healthy employees working with them. But I would do number 4 first to figure out what's really going on. And then there's bits and pieces actually of number 3. We didn't want to remind the team member that the business needs clients in a shaming kind of way or a threatening kind of way, but it is a reality. I mean, a business needs customers to succeed. So just to say, well, we know we need to serve the clients, so let's figure out together, what's going on, what can work. And then the little piece of number 1 that we kind of liked was acknowledging the difficulty, and the rest we didn't like because it sounds again like shaming people, but just saying, okay, this is a real issue. Let's talk about it. Let's find out what's really going on and see how much customization or personalization we can do in this kind of job, and what do we want to do collectively as a team. So this requires courage and the ability, I'd say EQ from a manager, to really be able to have the right conversation and then to influence up and out in the organization to do things differently.
Karen, excellent. Very well done to you and that group. In the end, number 4 is the best answer. And here's why. It's really all about, what do you need from me? And how, as a leader, and how can your opinions maybe influence not just how I should be thinking, but maybe how the group should be working differently. And again, you would think that this is common sense, but oftentimes we believe that if we express something like that, that's going to come back to bite us later, that it's something that's not common. And you said something that I think is very important here, and I'm being mindful of time. This notion of courage and EQ. All of this is about being very courageous. And in the end, what we're finding, and I hope you're seeing this trending now after this 3rd group, is that you're asking leaders to lead with courage that requires vulnerability. I actually believe that courage and vulnerability represent 2 sides of the same coin. But when you're stuck in standardization, vulnerability is perceived as a weakness, when what people don't realize more than ever, that it is perceived as a tremendous strength. I mean, just because you are have hierarchy and rank, it doesn't mean you know everything. And certainly one thing it doesn't mean that you know me as an individual. And again, longer discussion, but you'd be fascinated by the discussions I've had from deans of B schools that have recognized that how they've actually groomed and taught leaders in the past wasn't designed for the present.
Okay.
Well done. That entire ranking was perfect.
Team.
Group 4, can you beat group 3?
Oh, this is Jenny May. I am the cheerful spokesman for our group. I don't think we can beat that because it was excellent, but I'll try to be brief. From mission to contribution. So there's the situation. 2 people from another department, they're not connected to you in any way, have an idea for your team. And what do? And so there's various options there. We immediately just didn't like number 4. Disregard their idea is the opener. No, we're not going to disregard their idea. We're going to embrace it. So if you zoom in on number 3, it's aspirational. Come on into our team, present your idea, and we'll all hear it, and it's very inclusive. But immediately you bump up against this particular challenge of how you respond to the people from the other department depends on the idea itself. Because if the idea itself is so out in left field, you hit up against, does it align with our strategy? Does it, and you hit up against resource constraints. So we spent a fair amount of time on this, and Patty contributed a very simple but very relevant context for us, a specific example. What if the finance department has had a mentoring program? They've been doing it for 2 years. They've designed software for it. It's great, but the program will die if the HR function isn't open to the idea and picking it up and executing on it. But you have to say, there's the tension, right? No, it's not in our strategic priorities for this year. No, we don't have the resources to support that. We love that it's a good idea. Maybe it'll make the cut next year. So you immediately go to that tension point between reality and inclusiveness. So our answer is 4 is the low one, 3 is the high one, and the dialogue is very important, but then you just need to frame up what you do with the idea in a way that everyone understands and embraces, and that's in alignment with the mission of the company.
I'm sorry, Jenny, which one did you rank number 1, the best one?
3.
Congratulations.
All right.
Exactly. And so how often, again, not to go off on a tangent, but how often do we disregard ideas because of people's experience? Again, this goes back to that notion that we measure and evaluate and see people based upon their tenure, their title, their rank, not because they can contribute. And in fact, it's interesting. James, are you there? You're on mute, Lori.
Yes.
James, I can't see you. There you
Yes.
are. So during the break, we're going to play this out for you right now, Jenny. I had asked the question, how much do we think, and it was Lori and James and myself, and I asked the question, how much time do you think organizations spend on crisis management? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, not just to be kind, not enough at all. And I said, well, think about what you just answered. Here's what you answered. You basically said that we don't know our people enough to know when and where they should be activated, right? Capacities activated, right, realized and exceeded during times of crises. And then James shared a story. James, I'd like to ask you to share that story, please.
Okay, so I worked for a chemical manufacturing company, and we had a crisis plan because we made dangerous chemicals, if you would, if they got out of the pipes. So, but our action plans were deemed by title. So the superintendent was the leader of the group, and then everybody had their pecking order, but it was really by title. And the thing is that it wasn't based on the fact that the lead operator was actually the person who could lead in a crisis. The superintendent, he panicked, he froze, things like that happened. but he was the leader because he had the title.
Thank you, James. The whole point is disregarding an idea because of their experience happens a lot. And we miss out on opportunities because standardization has shaped that way of thinking. But with respect to number 3, again, we invite them to share their idea with the team and participate in implementation and create a system that encourages more cross-team collaboration. This is part of what we mean by moving from tribalism to human so that we can contribute more in strengthening the mission. And again, it is the best answer. The systems haven't been designed to actually adopt that way of operating enough. And you said it very eloquently, Jenny, is that we think about what's in the strategic plan now, when what this is really creating is an opportunity that's more important than what the plan said. So why don't we act on these things? Mm-hmm. This is another example of falling into the standardization trap because of what the strategy said, not what's going to help us evolve. So an example of substitution versus evolutionary thinking. Thank you, Jenny, and your team. Excellent.
So we've got about 3 minutes left till 10, but let's go ahead and take group 5.
Yeah, great. Hi, I'm Carolyn, representing Group 5. I'll go nice and quick. So in terms of the scenario that we had, every quarter our team is reporting out a metric that senior leadership seems to really, really care about, but for us it's meaningless. So, we're needing to then push our team to focus on something that doesn't matter, and it's really distracting from the work that does matter. So in terms of a quick rank order of the different options, number 3 stood out to us as being the best option by far. So, explaining to leadership that this metric isn't measuring something meaningful, and talking about, how you have other priorities that would be, much better to focus on. From there, we thought 2 was probably that next option, although, clearly 3 is the one we want to go with, just because you are kind of saving your team from being spread too thin. And then we saw really 1 and 4 as, kind of that next group of lower, desired options. The first one is just, continuing the status quo. This for us was essentially a do nothing option. So, you're really not taking any action. And then that 4th option was around, pushing for the results, but only having 1 or 2 people on your team driving it. And for us, we thought this was just, had the potential of creating so many rifts between the team, who is getting put on the hook for that extra work. And even if they are getting an extra day off, is that the standard norm for other teams who are also reporting out this metric? And what does that say about the leader's support of your executive leaders asking for this metric in the first place? It really kind of undermines their thinking, and we weren't really feeling like that was positive. So number 3 is where we stuck, and Rachel, who is also in our team, had a great input around, in addition to talking about how this metric doesn't mean anything, we want to do it in a way that is very educational, and then also get at the root of why leadership is asking for this metric in the first place. We want to go in with that positive intent, thinking that leadership is asking this, thinking that it's something important. So how can we redirect in a way that helps them to better understand what it's like to be in this role, be on this team, and give them another option for what metric would be useful to look at.
Carolyn, very well articulated. Okay. Number 3 is the right answer. No question about it. And this is an example of how it sends a message to the team that their impact really matters and that they can achieve that impact by influencing the business in their own way. And, this is another example of how it takes courage from us employees in this case on, explaining why things don't work. And I'll tell you, I've seen this happen over and over and over again. And again, we don't have the time to go deep into this, but let me just end by saying this. The group got 100%. And it goes back to this: knowing something's right isn't enough to start doing what's right. And knowing something's wrong isn't enough to stop doing it. This is the tension that we are dealt with every single day. And if we allow the forces of standardization in their current form, now let me again reiterate, we want personalization to help strengthen new standards. But the standards of the past, we've learned from this COVID crisis that they have finally lost the war. Why? Because this is such a personal crisis. And it goes back to our inability to serve the mass variances in people. So we know when things are right and when things are wrong. But it's going to take courage, and it's going to take a flattening of organizations to get us on a path of personalization. And I'll share something else that I shared with Lori during the breakouts. Is I shared with her that, HR today, let me step back and I'll close with this thought. You may wonder, who in the C-suite is really drawn to this content? And I'll tell you in rank order. Number 1, Chief Strategy Officer. 2, Chief Transformation Officer. 3, Chief Executive Officer. 4, Chief Marketing Officer. And without going through all the C's, who's the last one? Human Resources. And you might find that to be, well, doesn't make sense. Well, sure it does, because this thinking puts a different level of accountability and influence in the role that this role was really never prepared for. Because now your value, as I mentioned earlier, multiplies so much, you don't need any permission to be a part of strategy, transformation, or anything else. There isn't another group that should be defining your role as a cost center. You should be operating like a profit center, because it's the individuals that are going to allow us to drive more growth throughout the organization if we find a way to not only find the balance, but respect the individual. Because remember, if you think, like I said earlier, they're the ones that know the things that need to be done. If they've had the right leaders to put them in those positions. But I share this because your value is truly multiplied. And recognize that it's your responsibility now to evolve faster than ever before. So all those ideas that maybe that you've had and carried with you that the strategic plan didn't call for in the past, they're ready for them. So I hope you're encouraged by that, because it's really in your hands, because you're now asking executives who really, they care about people, but they never really understood why they were so important. Now is your time to flourish. So anyway, I really appreciate your time today, and congratulations on being 100%. And just know that, I always leave with this. When you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't, do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. And I hope that you all do that.
Thank you, Glenn. You might want to unmute and clap. Thank you.
That was great. You don't have to. Thanks. Okay.
Appreciate it. So we have just a couple closing comments. Mike is going to share our slide. We do have a survey that we would like you to fill out. So I put a link in chat. We will also have a QR code that Mike's going to share on the PowerPoint. Glenn and his company we're sure you have more questions. And Glenn and his company have offered the course, the free course which expires on June 14th. So I will put that, the link will be in the PowerPoint, but I will also put it in chat. And is there, okay. Mike, is there anything else we need to mention? You said can you do this last slide here? He's muted. Mike is muted.
You're not seeing the slide?
I see it, yes.
Ah, okay.
There's a valuable prize. You want to talk to the prize?
It's a secret, but it's not a huge prize, but it's a very nice prize. And all you got to do is do the 3-minute survey.
Ooh. So there's a prize. So we really, really want your feedback. Yes, great. All right, with that, we will close. Anyone who would like to stay on and talk to Glenn is welcome. He's agreed to stay on for 15 minutes. But just thank you so much, Glenn. This has been very thought-provoking topic, and we're really appreciative of your generosity with the course, and Chris for providing the books as well. And I'm sure it's given us a lot to think about. And just we will, Chris has a program planned for September, and we are also contemplating an informal session in a Let's Lunch in June, July timeframe. So be on the lookout for that. All right.
Again.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, all. Thank you.
Okay.